Today we'll be looking at a case from the starting era of the 20th century, so sit back as we go to USA. Oceana Wardlaw Martin Snead, known to everyone as Ocey, was born in September 1885. Her father, Colonel Robert Maxwell Martin, was a veteran of the American Civil War, and her mother, Caroline, was the daughter of a Supreme Court justice, ranking the family firmly as established and respectable within society. In Ocey's early childhood, they lived together in a very large house in Louisville, Kentucky, a setting that reflected comfort, security, and social standing. Around the end of the 19th century, that stability came to an abrupt end when the house was destroyed by a mysterious fire. The circumstances surrounding the fire were never clearly explained, and not long afterward the family left Kentucky and moved to New York City, closing one chapter of their lives without questions or investigation. Ocey was not an only child. She also had a younger brother named Hugh, who died when he was just 7 years old in the New York house. His death was allegedly caused by falling down a flight of stairs, and hence was officially treated as an accident by the police. Hugh's life, however, had been insured, and following his death, the insurance company paid $22,000 to his parents. After receiving the settlement, the family moved once more, settling in Manhattan.
But tragedy did not end with the family's move. Not long after settling into their new home, another sudden loss followed. One day, neighbors reported hearing a loud crash from inside the Wardlaw residence. When they entered the house to investigate, they found Colonel Robert Maxwell lying unconscious. Standing over him was his wife, Caroline, while nearby, young Ocey was seen crying. The circumstances were unclear, and when Ocey attempted to speak, her mother looked at her and said only one word: "Remember," silencing her before she could say anything. The police were called and conducted an investigation, but the inquiry was brief. Despite the unusual scene and the confusion surrounding the incident, the death of Ocey's father was officially ruled an accident, and the matter was quietly closed. Caroline's background played an important role in how the event was reviewed. She was originally from the state of Virginia, born into an old and well-established family, and her social standing carried weight. She was regarded as respectable, law-abiding, and above suspicion. That reputation followed her even in the investigation of her husband's death. After her husband's death, Caroline left New York with Ocey and moved south to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where her family was already established and well known. Caroline had two sisters. One was Virginia Wardlaw, an unmarried woman who ran a girls' boarding school that, at the time, carried a solid reputation. It was considered respectable, orderly, and well managed. Caroline's other sister, Mary, worked closely with her, helping maintain both the daily operations of the school and its standing in the community. Virginia suggested that Caroline remain with them and offered her a role assisting with the school's administration. It was a decision that raised quiet concern, as Caroline was known to be unpredictable and, at times, difficult to rely on, but despite this, she accepted the position eagerly. Not long after, Ocey was also enrolled as a student, placing her inside the same institution where her mother and aunts held authority. At first, nothing seemed out of place, but as time passed, people began to notice that Ocey was appearing less often among the other students. She attended fewer activities and spent more of her time away from the school itself, usually at her aunt's house. Before long, the way the school was run began to change. Caroline started altering the curriculum, making adjustments to lessons and schedules without offering explanations. Pupils were moved from one classroom to another. Doors that had always been left open were locked with padlocks. Caroline's behavior seemed to affect her sisters as well, and soon all three of them began dressing in black. They were seen walking the halls at night and making sudden, unannounced visits to the young students' sleeping quarters, appearing without warning and observing the pupils closely. Among the students, the three women became known as the Sisters in Black. As days passed, stories began circulating among the students. Some said the sisters, dressed in black and heavily veiled, went to Evergreen Cemetery at night and gathered around a grave. Others said they walked the school grounds after dark, wearing their long black dresses and veils. Whether these stories were true or not, fear took hold among the students.
As time went on, the school's situation began to get worse.
Carolyn's financial mismanagement, combined with the sisters' increasingly strange behavior, started to damage its reputation. Parents withdrew their daughters, and student numbers steadily declined. What had once been a well-regarded institution was no longer able to sustain itself. In 1907, the situation reached a breaking point. The Board of Governors intervened and dismissed the sisters from their positions. With their removal, the school effectively came to an end. Mary Wadlaw left Tennessee and returned to Georgia, while the future of the remaining sisters was uncertain. Virginia did not remain without prospects for long. She soon secured another position, this time as headmistress of Montgomery Female College in Christiansburg, Virginia. Like the previous school, it was described as an established and reputable boarding school for young women. Virginia invited Carolyn and Ocey to join her there, and they accepted. Ocey had two male cousins, Fletcher and John Snead, who were the sons of Mary. Both men were living in Linville, Tennessee. John was married to a woman named Anna, and Fletcher was married to a woman named Vashti. With the collapse of one school behind them and a new institution ahead, the family relocated once again, carrying their private history with them as they settled into Christiansburg.
After settling into her routine, Caroline soon turned her attention to her nephew, John Snead. She traveled to Linville, Tennessee, and asked him to come to the college to teach. John agreed, though he did so reluctantly and against the wishes of his wife, Anna, who remained behind in Linville. Once in Christiansburg, John began to change. He became quiet and withdrawn, and those around him noticed that he appeared increasingly under the influence of his aunts. Not long after starting his teaching job, John went on a trip with Caroline. During the journey, he fell from a train near Roanoke. Stories from people soon followed. Some said he had jumped, others believed he had been pushed. No clear explanation was ever settled on. Weeks later, another incident occurred. While taking measurements for the college's water supply, John became trapped in a cistern. He was rescued by the caretaker, but once again questions were raised about how the situation had come about. Then, one morning, John was found lying on the floor of his room at the college with severe burns on his body. His nightclothes were soaked in lamp oil and had caught fire. Doctors were called and attempted to treat him, but his injuries were severe. After 3 hours attempting to save him, John Snead was pronounced dead. The police were notified, and the sisters stated that the incident had been an accident. John's wife Anna, along with the insurance company, suspected that something was wrong. Despite this, the police did not pursue a serious investigation, as they regarded Caroline and Virginia to be respectable and law-abiding members of the community. Shortly afterward, the sisters received an insurance payout of $12,000.
After John Snead's death, Caroline returned to Linville, Tennessee, and soon turned her attention to John's brother, Fletcher. She insisted that Fletcher accompany her back to Christiansburg, saying there were family matters that required his presence. Fletcher agreed to go with her. Once he left Linville, Fletcher's contact with his wife Vashti became occasional and then stopped altogether. Over time, the marriage ended in divorce. Fletcher remained in Christiansburg, where he spent increasing amounts of time with Ocey. The two were first cousins and had known one another for years. Eventually, they got married. Almost 1 year after the marriage, Ocey gave birth to a daughter. The child was taken from her shortly after the birth. A few days later, Caroline informed Ocey that the baby had tragically died. She gave her no further explanations. At the same time, conditions at the college continued to worsen. The sisters' extreme behavior and Caroline's handling of finances further damaged the school's standing. The number of admitted students continued to fall, and the institution struggled to continue operating. By 1908, the situation could no longer be sustained, so the sisters left the college. They packed their belongings and, along with Fletcher and Ocey, left their lives in Christiansburg behind as well. Together, the group relocated once again, this time returning to New York. By the time they returned to New York, Ocey was pregnant again. She went to live with her mother Caroline and her aunt Virginia, settling with them in Brooklyn. Fletcher, however, did not stay with her. He left for Canada, saying he believed he would have a better chance of finding work there. Ocey was still grieving the loss of her first child. Even while living with her mother and Aunt Virginia, instead of improving, her relationship with her mother and aunt grew increasingly strained. She was isolated, and her condition began to worsen. During this time, Caroline told Ocey that Fletcher had died in Canada, delivering the news out of nowhere with no explanation or details, which made Ocey's condition even worse. A doctor named William Pettit was called to see her. When he arrived, he found a pregnant woman who was physically weak and visibly frail. He noted signs of depression and observed that she was malnourished. During his visits, Dr. Pettit also noticed that Ocey appeared afraid of her mother and her aunt. Dr. Pettit left instructions for her care, placing responsibility on Caroline. When he returned on subsequent visits, he found that his instructions had not been followed and that Ocey's condition had not improved. Eventually, Caroline informed him that his services were no longer required. He was dismissed and never paid. Another doctor was later consulted. He reached the same conclusion and again diagnosed malnutrition. His recommendations were also ignored, and he too was dismissed. Concerned for Ocey's condition, the doctor made an attempt to get food to her by climbing through an open upstairs window, but Caroline and Virginia ordered him to stop coming for visits altogether. Seeking advice, the doctor contacted a lawyer, who told him that if the family did not want him involved, there was nothing further he could do.
The lawyer told him to stop his interest in Ocey, as his family simply didn't want him there. Ocey later gave birth to her second child, a boy she named David. Soon after the birth, the baby was taken from her by her mother and placed in a hospital. When his condition improved, he was sent to an orphanage and was not returned to his mother after that. As Ocey's condition worsened, Caroline and Virginia again called for Dr. William Pettit. When he arrived, he found her in a pitiful state. She was confined to her bed and had been given large amounts of morphine. She was no longer pregnant, and during the visit, Ocey told him that her baby had been taken to the hospital by her mother. During this visit, Virginia spoke directly to Dr. Pettit. She told him that Ocey should be made aware that she was dying and that she should be encouraged to make a will. Virginia added that if he agreed, Ocey would make him a beneficiary and he would receive $1,000. But Dr. Pettit refused. Instead, he instructed that a nurse be brought in to care for Ocey. The nurse arrived before the day was out, but she was dismissed almost immediately by Caroline. Ocey remained confined to her bed. She ate very little and continued to grow weaker. Throughout this period, she was repeatedly given morphine by her mother and her aunt, while her condition continued to decline and no further medical care was allowed. In September 1909, Caroline contacted a lawyer named Julius Caraba and asked him to come and assist her daughter with making a will. When Caraba arrived, he found Ocey lying in bed, extremely thin and weak. Her mother and aunts were present, dressed in black, praying over her. After the prayers, Virginia asked Ocey whether she wished to make a new will, and Ocey agreed. Caraba, however, was struck by her condition. He urged the sisters to give her food and to call a doctor. They replied that they did not have enough money to do either. Caraba offered to pay for food and medical care himself, but the sisters refused his offer. When he was later left alone with Ocey, she told him that she already had a will and handed it to him. In it, she had left everything to her grandmother. The lawyer took the will as her final testament. Soon afterward, Caroline and Virginia moved with Ocey to a house at 89 East 14th Street in East Orange, New Jersey. The house was barely furnished. There was no heat and no gas for cooking, and little food was present. Ocey remained confined to her bed as they settled into the new residence. On November 29, 1909, a doctor named Dr. Horace Simmons was called to the house in East Orange, New Jersey. When he arrived, he was met by Virginia, who was dressed in black and was taken upstairs to the bathroom. There he found Ocey lying dead in the bathtub. She appeared extremely thin and frail. On the floor nearby was a pile of neatly folded clothes, and pinned on top was a note. The note spoke of the loss of Ocey's child and other loved ones, referred to a long illness, and stated that death would bring relief from pain and suffering. At the end of the note, it was signed with her name. Dr. Simmons asked Virginia several questions about what had happened. He was unsettled by her casual answers and the lack of urgency surrounding the death. After leaving the house, he contacted the police and reported his concerns. Sergeant William O'Neill was sent to the address. When he knocked on the door, he was admitted by a woman dressed in black and wearing a veil. He was taken to the bathroom on request, and he started to examine the scene. He then inspected the rest of the house and noted that there was very little furniture and almost no food present. Sergeant O'Neill questioned Virginia about when Ocey had died. She stated that it had occurred earlier that day. Dr. Horace Simmons, however, had already informed police that Ocey appeared to have been dead for at least 24 hours. When confronted with this, Virginia said that Ocey may have died the previous day but had not been discovered. Virginia was taken in for further questioning, and officers started searching the house. They found numerous insurance policies taken out on Ocey, which made them realize that there might be more to this case than just her death. The police later traced Dr. William Pettit, who described Ocey's treatment and condition. He also told them about his previous visits and how they led to Ocey being completely neglected. An autopsy later showed that at the time of her death, Ocey had been suffering from severe malnutrition. Handwriting analysis later revealed that the note had been written with one pen and signed with another. Police eventually located Caroline, who was staying at a hotel under an assumed name. In her possession were additional insurance documents and a large number of notes similar to the one found at the house.
With the investigation complete, Caroline Wardlaw Martin, Virginia Wardlaw, and Mary Snead were all charged with murder. The case quickly drew widespread attention, and newspapers across the country began covering Ocey's life and death in detail. Journalists examined every aspect of the story, searching for new angles and publishing increasingly sensational reports. The case became widely known as the bathtub mystery. During this coverage, it was discovered that Fletcher Snead, who had been believed dead, was in fact alive and living in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, where he was working in a hotel. Police interviewed him and determined that he had no involvement in Ocey's death. Reporters also claimed that the lease on the East Orange house expired on the day Ocey died, and that 3 additional life insurance policies had been taken out the day before her death. While awaiting trial, Virginia Wardlaw refused to eat, as her niece had done. Her condition declined, and on August 12, 1910, she died in her cell. Her body was returned to Christiansburg, Virginia, where she was buried at Sunset Cemetery. In January 1911, Caroline Wardlaw Martin agreed to plead guilty to a reduced charge of manslaughter and was sentenced to 7 years in the state prison at Trenton, New Jersey. Expecting a shorter sentence, she reacted angrily in court and shouted that she was innocent and had never harmed her daughter. After 1 year, she was declared mentally unstable and on May 18, 1912, was transferred to the Trenton Asylum, where she died on June 20, 1913. Caroline's plea resulted in Mary Snead being cleared on a technicality. She later moved to Colorado. In 1930, a lockbox at the First National Bank of Murfreesboro was opened, containing loose diamonds, diamond-studded gold brooches, a small black pouch, and a one-fingered black mitten labeled with Virginia Wardlaw's name. Mary later claimed the items, stating they had been stolen by a student she refused to identify. The press dismissed the explanation and speculated that Virginia had placed the items there to keep them from Caroline. The valuables were sold and the proceeds claimed by creditors. Mary later stated that Virginia had been an angel and that Caroline had been insane for years. She said she did not believe Ocey's death was murder, adding that she had not been present and that only those now dead knew what truly happened. Mary Snead died in 1937. Fletcher Snead later moved to Los Angeles, where he died on January 12, 1955, at the age of 79. Ocey Wardlaw Martin Snead was not remembered for the life she lived, but for the circumstances under which it ended. She was a young woman whose world steadily narrowed, whose voice was repeatedly spoken for, and whose suffering unfolded largely behind closed doors. Courts issued verdicts, sentences were passed, and headlines were printed, yet no conclusion ever fully explained how or why her life came to an end in that East Orange house. What remained was a case shaped by suspicion, silence, and unanswered questions, carried forward long after those involved were gone. Ocey's story did not conclude with clarity or certainty, and it is that unresolved space, more than any single detail, that continues to define it. If you have thoughts on this case, you're welcome to share them in the comments. And if you value careful, forgotten historical documentaries like this, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel.